Welcome to Not What I Thought. I'm Erika.
I'm Yolanda.
And I'm Becca. We're therapists, entrepreneurs, and perfectly imperfect humans.
We first met during a business owner retreat where we became fast friends because we're not afraid to be real and ask the hard questions about life. What we thought it would be like, how messy it actually is, and the courage it takes to create the life we want.
We continue to build our friendship and personal growth through our own retreats. We find the deepest connection in sharing our struggles and finding what we have in common rather than what divides us.
We're breaking down hard topics on our podcast and together have conversations about what it takes to find real talk, real support, and real rest for professional women. We're glad you're here. Join us on your favorite podcast platform.
I was not expecting, and it's definitely not what I thought it would be, to talk about sex, sexuality, gender identity, any of these types of subjects with my preteen daughter. So you both have already gone through all of this. Mine's the youngest of the group. And it's been an interesting experience, I think, in both directions, in that I expected her to be more uncomfortable as we're having these conversations. And I expected myself to be less uncomfortable. I thought I would be fine and totally chill. And I think during those conversations, I'm pretty straightforward. I know how to talk about some of these things, mainly from like professional experience. But then afterwards, I'm like, whoo, that was a doozy. It was a lot.
And just wait until they are having sex.
Yeah. That's going to happen.
We're not quite there yet.
Oh,
that too.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the articles and blogs or like videos or even clients that I've talked to, a lot of the stories I hear really seem to be that you sit your kid down and you're going to have the talk and you're going to share all the things. And the kid is like, oh, why are you telling me any of this? And that it's this really cringe thing. And I think our conversations have happened more organically than that, mainly with her hearing something at school, asking a question. I just answer it and then it's accepted. And then we just move to like the next thing we were doing anyway. Like, you want a snack? Okay, that's cool. Like, let's do that. So it's been very different than I thought it would be.
I think there's some of that is developmental also. Because similarly, as my kids ask questions or things come up, we just, talk pretty openly about whatever. I mean, I remember a conversation, it's kind of funny getting into the pool where it was like, ooh, we were talking about how it feels. There's like an extra bit of cold when the cold water reaches your genitals. Like, oh, wow, because there's extra nerve endings there, right? Like just very kind of normal about bodies and whatever. But Erika, I have noticed a difference with my older one as she got into being like 12 and 13. And then I think because of the developmental phase, there was a lot more of like, it was cringe. And I'm like, do you really I think you need to know. The conversation I'm thinking of in particular, I think was around probably periods. And I could see, it's like I could see her having the struggle of, I am interested in the information and I would like to know it. And I also am intensely uncomfortable in this conversation, would rather not be having it, but I do want to know it, right? Like, so I think there's something about the developmental phase of the child that might be more of what you were expecting, just a little older. I don't know.
Like, just wait, it's gonna happen.
Just wait, you'll get to have that awkwardness.
Well, and also the opposite sex parent, right? Because my oldest two are boys. Our youngest is a girl. And so, yeah, sex conversations with the boys were very different than with my daughter. And as the boys got older, they were more kind of one-on-one conversations with their dad. But yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm kind of with you, Erika. It's just it seemed to unfold much more organically, even from younger ages, with the decision to use, um, use biological terms for genitalia and, you know, like all of that. Um, and also there were definitely the cringy conversations too.
Yeah, those will happen for sure. But I remember growing up, it felt like there were really not conversations, and when there tried to be, it was so cringy that you
Right.
just couldn't even sit in it. And my parents' parenting is kind of a conundrum to me as I look back on it, because they didn't like censor movies or anything like that, like watch rated R movies, whatever. But if there was a sex scene, you had to cover your eyes, like as though, that was like doing something. Because you could just open your fingers, or like you're still hear what's going on, right? But there was never a conversation about that, or any real understanding, I think, of, okay, this is what sex is how it works. That was not done in an overt way in my household. And so I think, could be very confusing, which I imagine is why on the backside of it, to me, it's like, oh, okay, we can have these conversations and that's cool, but it's also weird and uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, growing up for me, it was in earlier years, don't have sex, because if you have sex, you'll get pregnant. And that's the only thing we want to not happen. And then as I got older, well, you know, sex is something that um, is for marriage. And when you're married, then your husband will enjoy sex, but you won't. It'll be a duty. Hmm.
Yeah. How
So
was that like?
what's that?
What was that like to hear that or take that in?
Um, well, I mean, it was the only thing I knew at the time, right? And yeah, there's a lot of unlearning to do when that's the messaging. So, you know, again, when it came to our own kids, it was a very differently intentioned conversations about sex.
What was it like growing up in your house, Becca?
Oh,
Okay, so here's what I remember. It's, I think I was probably about 6,
mm,
and I really wanted to know where babies came from.
mm,
And my mother tells me that she had tried to give me some kind of like age appropriate but vaguish answers, and that I was smart enough to know that they weren't telling me the whole story. And so I was apparently very insistent that, like, no, I really want to know. And this part I do remember, like laying in my bed. I remember which house we lived in, like laying in my little bed, and my mom being like, probably out of frustration, you really want to know? And I was like, yes, I really want to know. And so she gave me an explanation of how babies are made with the sperm and everything. And I was like, oh, really grossed out.
uh,
Um, and then like maybe I didn't actually really want to know that. Like I just remember being really grossed out. And then we didn't really talk about it again.
mm,
I
mm,
think by the time I was a teenager, a lot of that was kind of outsourced to church.
mhm,
And so at church, I got messages, kind of confusing messages sometimes, about like one person would say that sex is really great and you're going to enjoy it, but only do it with your spouse. Um, and then, I also heard some messaging around that like women don't like it as much.
mhm,
But definitely everything was like, wait until marriage, wait until marriage.
mhm,
And so some of my sex ed came from school. Honestly, some of it came from the internet because the internet was new and I could go like look things up.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, my mom was single. We lived with my grandma during my teenage years, who was also single. So like there was no sex happening in my house. It just like
mhm,
we just didn't talk about it.
mhm,
Yeah. But I do remember every once in a while I would say something and my mom would step in and be like, hey, you probably shouldn't say that phrase because this is what it means. Like, oh, kind of embarrassed, but also like, thanks for telling me.
You don't go to school and woo, here it is.
Yeah, yeah. It was confusing more than anything. Yeah.
mhm, mhm,
So it is very different then for me to be in a position with my own children where I am, trying to talk to them differently about their bodies and about sex and, like you said, gender identity. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's a whole new world.
Mhm.
It is, and I think, I mean, there's obviously like the logistics of sex and the, terminology and those kinds of things, but then yeah,
Yeah.
these other pieces of pleasure and enjoyment and sexuality, and it gets complicated really fast. And I think there was this other
Yeah.
part of my brain that's like, you're a couples therapist, you talk about sex every single day. So it's gonna be fine. And then you're like, okay, but my 10-year-old's telling me some of her thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
It's different. It's just different.
Yeah. Totally. Oh, and really brave. Like there's such the temptation to like not go there.
Because it would be easier in some ways to like avoid the discomfort or awkwardness or
Mhm.
whatever. Yeah.
Mhm. That's not doing anybody any favors. So,
Mhm.
Really not. And as I think about my own like learning, I actually don't even know how I learned about sex when I go back. Like maybe some stuff at church, some sex education at school, but I'm sure it was mainly just peers and later
yeah.
like experience, and that's certainly not how I would want my child to be learning about it.
I'm really thankful that you're saying that, Erica, because as you brought this topic forward, I'm older. And so I'm like, gosh, I know that what the messaging was at home, but like, same thing. How did the pieces come together?
Are you thinking about for your own kids or you for yourself?
No, for myself, for myself. I'm sure if we asked my kids, they would probably say a combination of all of it too. Yeah. But at least we tried to be more intentional and more explicit about having conversations. All of that. Porn too. It's another one that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think that's been in terms of a whole new world, right? Like trying to explain why you don't want to put certain things on the internet or what other people may
mhm,
be perceiving
mhm,
about you or your intentions or your body. And, these are hard
mhm.
conversations to have with other adults, let alone trying to figure out how
Yeah.
to explain. Or one that came up over the weekend with some of the political issues, right? Like, what is abortion? What does that mean? Why is it important for us to talk about it? Uh,
Mhm,
so it gets complicated really fast, and I think
mhm,
people used to view it in a more simple, straightforward way, and that's why it was kept like kind of in this box. This is how we look about it at it. This is how we talk about it. But there's just so much to explore. That's a different mindset, but
yeah. And definitely not a one-time conversation. I think that is like something that each of us have expressed that I think is really important to highlight. It's over and over and organically and structured and like all of it matters.
Oh, I think that part of why this, at least for me, part of why some of these conversations can be so challenging is it's not just confronting like the shame or awkwardness of, somewhere inside of me, there is still a little, 13-year-old who thinks that you're not supposed to talk about these things. And so then
Mhm,
I'm, kind of battling her a little bit as I'm trying to remain cool on the outside as I'm, talking to my kids about stuff, right? So like there's that. Um, but also sometimes having the conversations with our children, especially if we are teaching them something different than how we were raised,
mhm,
it forces us to like crystallize and articulate our thoughts in a way that
mhm,
maybe we haven't before,
mhm,
right? So, whether it's abortion or pornography or birth control or any number of other things, we may be in a position where we're like, yeah, we believe the way that we were raised, and then that's easy, and we can just say it's this. But even if that's true, and we have like curious kids who say, but why?
mhm,
It forces us to have to like shore up or like articulate that stuff in a way that we maybe don't really. So
mhm,
what does it look like to have conversations with kids about porn um in a way that's still like sex positive
mhm,
or that is not just shaming of all things sexual, but also keeping them safe on the internet, right? Like there's
Mhm.
so many things that can be
It's
really, really confusing. And I think that's part of why maybe we get awkward about it or why we want to shy away from it. Cause it's like, I don't know how to explain what I think. It's easier if I say, just don't do that.
mhm, mhm.
It's
Yeah.
bad. Like, move
Just don't
on.
do it.
Yeah, I mean, all of that. And maybe we normalize for ourselves and going into these conversations, yeah, this is uncomfortable and we're going to talk about it. So, like
Mhm.
we have uncomfortable conversations and this is why, and this is important.
Right.
And yeah, it is, I think it is getting clear with yourself about what you believe about things and being more nuanced at the same time.
Yeah. I love that idea. Being more nuanced and I'm trying to practice noticing which questions, topics, ideas make me more uncomfortable than others in my own responses. And then
Mhm.
trying to really challenge that for myself. Like, oh, is that something, in my sexual history? Is that something in my perception of myself or what I'm able to experience as a woman, right? Those kinds of things. And oh, maybe that's something I need to go
Mhm.
look at and talk with somebody or journal or,
Mhm.
explore all of the above. But so I think it's good data also for us as women and humans and parents for sure, but definitely just individually.
Mhm.
Something that really helps me in those types of conversations is if I can kind of like channel a mentor almost
Mhm.
like maybe a sex educator that I've listened to speak and I really like her, or somebody else I know in my life that's like, oh, I'm just going to imagine that I am this person and kind of channel them as I'm having this conversation with my kid if I notice that kind of awkwardness coming up. Or even just like saying for the kid, like, the reason you might notice that I'm uncomfortable, that's not because this is bad stuff to talk about. It's because I was taught that you don't talk about it and I'm trying to do something different. And just
Right.
naming that.
Yeah.
Or noticing that other adults have a hard time with these things. That doesn't mean that there's something bad. It doesn't, whatever, just, but like, so that we can like contextualize and situate those things so that the kids know how to make sense of, why are we not allowed to say this stuff at school, but you say it's fine at home?
Right.
Or, whatever that is.
Yeah. Or why is this such a big thing in this political realm or like
Right,
whatever?
right.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a state that maybe is an abstinence only state and you're
Mhm.
teaching your children differently, or maybe
Mhm.
you're in a state of comprehensive sex ed and you're a parent who wants to teach their kids abstinence only, like we have to be able
Mhm.
to talk
Mhm.
about where our values are and
Mhm.
help our kids understand how those fit into the bigger context so they can make sense of it.
Mhm.
And man, I'm always curious what's going to get repeated at school and shared with another friend. And I'm sure I'll be getting a phone call at some point from somebody. Um, and should we be challenging that? It just opens up a million questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's another reason why we tend to not have the conversations, right? Because are we doing it the right way, quote unquote, right way? Or, is someone else going to disagree or is someone else going to be upset with us? And um, yeah, even more so having some clarity about why we're having the conversation with our kids to begin with. So, Erica, thanks for bringing an uncomfortable conversation here to the space. What does your heart know to be true?
My heart knows to be true that it's okay to be uncomfortable, especially when we tell ourselves that we shouldn't be uncomfortable. And even though I have professional knowledge in a realm that feels like it may be helpful in a personal situation, um, and it is that still my own family of origin bullshit, my own views of myself, my own sexual history is going to pop up in those conversations from time to time. And it's a lot to balance, but that's also okay.
Mm.
Yolanda, what does your heart know to be true?
Yeah, well, my heart knows that the only reason that I called it an uncomfortable conversation is because of the family of origin bullshit. And like I have an opportunity to normalize these topics with my own kids so that they have a different experience with themselves and their own sexuality and their own relationships, and hopefully not carry as much junk into their future as I've had to unload for myself. How about you, Becca?
My heart knows that I don't want to leave my kids confused and alone and figuring stuff out on their own. And so I will go through whatever awkwardness or discomfort I need to go through so that I will not leave them alone. That's worth it.
That's beautiful.
What a fun conversation. Different.
Yeah.
Keep rocking it, mamas.
All we can do.
Yeah.
We are so excited to announce our upcoming live event. Join us online on January 19th, 2025, where we'll guide you through the sometimes shame and guilt-ridden experience of setting goals for the year. We'll have real talk about how goal setting can lead to burnout and real support for visioning a 2025 that includes real rest, connection, and play. Go to notwhatithought.com to register. We hope to see you there.